6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire.
Hey guys, and welcome to the VDoor Locksmith show. We're going to give pause for just a second because we've learned from enough prior episodes that it's always good to make sure that volume on audio and everything's working. I've got my mic here. I'm not wearing the shirt lapel today. So if you guys can hear us, be sure to just say that you can hear me. That's all we need. We would also love, we're happy to give some shout outs to anybody who engages on the show. So tell us where you're watching from. Tell us who you work for. Anything you're excited about. And then as well, as we get into the show, I'm still nervous that I'm saying a whole bunch of stuff that nobody's hearing because nobody's commented yet.
We have audio.
Oh, audio's working. Mr. Blair Loney, thank you so much. All right. So, on to today's show. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We've got a special show the next 2 days. I am working hand in hand with a couple of guys within the SPE Energy Dot forum that's going to be taking place August 15th of next month. They're going to be bringing in a lot of people from within Silicon Valley, within tech and education, as well as some other heavy hitters in the energy space to be able to put on a first of its kind energy event. And on today's show, we have one of the founders of the guys over at Plug and Play's energy space, Wade Bitaraf, right? Get that?
Hey, David. Yes. Thank you for inviting me. I'm excited here.
Wade, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I know you're doing this on your lunch break because you're over there in California, but if it's anything like Silicon Valley, I'm guessing y'all have an in-house cafeteria or of some sort that provides food, right?
That's right. I'm all ready for this show. I've had some really good snack prior to it, so it's exciting.
Excellent, man. Well, thanks so much for joining. Oh, wow. We've got Sounds Good from Argentina. George Danforth and Mauricio Adrian Copel are watching the show right now. Thank you guys for tuning in. We're already up to about 20 followers. That's good stuff to see. So, Wade, with this event that's coming up with the SPE, the Energy Dot show, tell me a little bit about what you're looking to be able to get out of the show. What are you guys bringing to the table in y'all's portion of the show being the new technology?
Absolutely, David. Yeah, and again, thank you for inviting me over to this show. I'm excited to share a little bit more about what Plug and Play does and talk a little bit about what is it we're planning to do in Houston, particularly as it relates to the upcoming event at SPE. You know, coming from an oil and gas background and being an old-time member of SPE, it's exciting to be back. I don't know how much you would like me to share it does, but obviously there's some really announcements to make during this event, and that's primarily one of the objectives that we have by me participating, talking a little bit more about what is the strategy in Houston and enhancing Plug and Play's footprint into the oil and gas space, and planning to bridge some of the resources that we have across various industries to oil and gas sector. So yeah, happy to share a little more in depth, but generally speaking, being back in the community and talk a little bit about what we've done in the oil and gas space and what is our strategy moving forward.
Okay, so I did skip a step there. I apologize to everybody watching. I didn't let Wade tell us what is Plug and Play. I just jumped right into it. I'm too excited to be talking about this. So give us a little, because obviously Plug and Play is involved in many different things. High level, what is Plug and Play? And then subset to that, what is your involvement with Plug and Play, and what are some of y'all's goals within the team that you're leading?
Sure. Just for the context, I lead our energy and sustainability practice here at Plug and Play. Joined Plug and Play ecosystem about 3 years ago, end of 2016, as a part-time consultant to our CEO in his plastic business. And then, over time, kind of got a little bit more active in the energy space as we saw a lot of large oil and gas companies shopping for strategic investment here in the Valley. But again, from a very holistic view, Plug and Play is first and foremost an active early stage investor. We, as of 2018, we did about 220 investments. So our ticket size is small, anywhere from 50,000 up to $500,000, and we rarely lead around. But that I'd say is our first and foremost activity here in the Valley. Secondarily, as for a couple of different reasons, we try to position ourselves as both as an incubator and an accelerator. So we run 12 industry-specific verticals here in our headquarters. As I mentioned, I lead our energy practice, including oil and gas as well as electricity. Other divisions include IoT, mobility, real estate, travel, health, insurance, finance, food, materials, retail, etc. And our goal here by running these programs is to create a non-equity opportunity for the startups from around the world to come, engage, participate, and hopefully land some of our large corporate partners as their clients. And along the way, we kind of use the industry platform to conduct our own due diligence and offer the startups capital from our own private family business that we have. So that's kind of like an overview of what we do, and hopefully we'll get to kind of do a little bit more deep dive on some of our details of our practice in the show.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about who are some of the companies you guys have already started to look at, and then maybe also what are some of the specific technologies that you guys are hoping to be able to find something in? Is it more of just the digitization of the oil field, or are you guys even looking for mechanical and hardware innovations that are still rapidly taking place, even though I think that they're being overshadowed by the digitization of the oil field, which still needs to happen?
Absolutely. So basically a couple of different questions you asked. Number one, the folks that we work with in our practice, we spend about 6 to 7 months just landscape opportunities and see, how we should build the foundation of our energy practice, given the takeaways and best practices from the adjacent verticals that we run here at Plug and Play very successfully. We have been convinced that the future of the energy sector is at the intersection and the convergence of the electrification sector. So we believe, the energy sector will be decentralized, digitized, and decarbonized in future. And many of our investment, strategies and our cost allocation is aligned with that on a long-term perspective. But we started the program with, Siemens Power and Gas and some of the other, major players in Japan energy market. And today we work with some of the largest, players of the sector like ExxonMobil, Chevron, Phillips 66, from across the whole industry value chain. So from the upstream to midstream and downstream, we partner with large corporations and we try to pair them up with technologies that can help, reduce their cost or improve their operations. So going off of that to the focus areas, the process for us is twice a year. We look at, about 600-700, sometimes upwards of 1,000 companies, and we do a drill down of those to the top 100, based on the interest areas of the corporate partners in each practice, and we provide the most relevant companies based on their top priorities and pain points. And typically what we see in the oil and gas space, their strategy falls into two different buckets. Number one, technologies that can help them understand the future of the sector. So a lot of, electrification of things, whether it's transportation or your operations, energy storage. We see a lot of energy peer-to-peer energy transaction. So we see the future of sector. And then in the second bucket of their strategy, corporations in the oil and gas are trying to, as I mentioned, optimize their processes so they can kind of see the incremental changes in their business. Technologies as it relates to applications of industrial IoT, AI, and machine learning. So to your point about digitalization of oil field, that certainly is an area that, the corporations in that sector are trying to leverage these new technologies to inform the internal stakeholders with new metrics that they can create that can inform some of the dialogues when it comes to their cost allocation, energy trading, inventory management, maintenance of their assets. A lot of the kind of key components of their operations can be optimized through the technologies that we see are rising here in our global ecosystem.
Wow. So you guys are, I mean, it's hard enough for me just to be able to talk to all the guys in the drilling side of the business that is part of the upstream, and for me to be able to have a grasp on it. I can only imagine being in your position where you're covering a multitude of the portions of the industry, going from downstream all the way through upstream and midstream, and trying to be able to combat all of the issues that may get thrown your way from some of the big operators out there. So you've definitely got a full plate, as I could imagine, of technology you're having to sort through. So talk to me about this. Who are some of the companies that you guys have already kind of engaged with and kind of put out there that you're able to talk about?
Absolutely. So from our partners' perspective, as I mentioned, we have some of the larger stakeholders like ExxonMobil and Chevron and Phillips 66, DCP Midstream, and we started back in 2016, and then we branched out to China and Europe, working now with some of the larger players in the Chinese ecosystem, like the State Grid of China, and in Europe with power generation companies like Uniper and the Invent Capital, which is the investment arm of the Czech Republic utility. From the startup perspective, as I mentioned, twice a year we iterate our approach, and we sit down with the partners to see what is their top focus areas and what are some of the pressing needs that they're trying to address through the technologies. And we have been able to accelerate nearly 60 companies through our previous 4 cohorts. Some of the companies that I can publicly talk about that got engaged with our partners, I can give you maybe the 2 or 3 examples of the startups that are actively conducting pilot projects with the partners. Would that be something?
Yeah, tell us.
Terrific. Yeah, so we
today's your platform, man.
That's exciting. Yeah. So one of the companies that got really engaged in our platform is a company called Shuv, that basically is in the asset management and asset tracking system. They primarily using their tags. They actually invented a protocol to be able to monitor the movable assets in a large field, mainly in this particular use case in the oil and gas space. They have a kind of station, like one station that can track up to 10,000 assets. So they attach their tags to to all the portable assets, indoor and outdoor.
Oh wow!
With a pretty reasonable range of almost 500 meter, so they be able to see where these assets go and how they can also monitor the health of those assets through those tags. The tags don't require a battery, so they're guaranteed for 10 years of working. So very interesting from a maintenance perspective. So the company Shuv is getting a lot of attention, and the technology that they're using to be able to monitor those assets is kind of the second incarnation of the company called Silver Spring Networks, that was built to build the kind of connected meters, electric meters, and now they're kind of branching out from stationary assets being meters to portable assets being everything that works in a factory land. So that's an interesting company that really helps large heavy industries to be able to manage and monitor their assets. Another company that I can talk a little bit about is the company called Noiseless Acoustics. They basically have created a hybrid hardware and software solutions that can help predict the health of power generation units in a like power generation system. Primarily, what you see, how some of the AI and machine learning can read the signature of the health of the assets. This new tool and device helps do the same thing, but with the acoustic signature of those assets, which is another interesting technology that is now in a pilot project with 2 or 3 of our corporate partners. And then there's so many other examples, but as you can see the trend here, most of the technologies that we see have applications in the oil and gas space are those that don't really target the core of the industry. So anything, let's say exploration, production, reservoir management, drilling, completion, we don't see too many opportunities in those space. Whereas in soft cost optimization and kind of optimizing some of the back end office operations, we see tremendous opportunities.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing those with me. What are some of the things that maybe you guys haven't seen a company be able to present or be able to handle that maybe some of your corporate partners are asking for a solution for?
Yeah. So you see, like the way we work with these large corporations is that we try to create channels internally that can effectively bring these startups into their business across the board. So we have, let's say, a main point of contact, a liaison between the two networks, and that person really has a good understanding of the kind of how the corporate is structured and heads of business units. So each time that they come in to visit Plug and Play, they bring a head of business unit, and that prior to their visit, they kind of identify what that specific business unit is looking for, and what are some of the use cases that they're trying to find through the startups. Sometimes when it comes to very niche areas, for example, in gas leak detection or technologies that can help better manage their pipelines using applications of hardware, we don't really see too many startups in this space where they can actually create new hardware solutions that can scale across the organization. So in those cases, particularly, we try to find some of the kind of software solutions that use the applications of AI and analytics that can help inform the existing operators as to how they can more efficiently manage those pipelines and go about the maintenance in a more efficient and intelligent way. So in those areas, when it comes to scouting startups, obviously, you asked a question earlier on as to whether we do only hardware solutions or software solutions. A general rule of thumb for us is our scouting efforts are curated towards those corporations' needs. So if they are looking to bring hardware solutions into their business, we do. If they want to look into software, so we pretty much align our interests. We are looking for venture grade returns. So those two questions back to each other. There's some really niche areas that we think are only applicable to certain niche markets. We do kind of go about finding the technologies and bringing them to the partners group. But when it comes to investing in them, we definitely are looking for technologies that can scale and bring venture returns.
So I was doing some a little bit of research before we got on air here. So are you guys working with Data Gumbo, and what are y'all looking to be able to get out of them in the oil and gas space?
Yeah, absolutely. So the whole topic of blockchain for us is, we might be a little biased because we've looked into a wide variety of technologies using applications of blockchain, and we have seen tremendous growth in certain industries like finance, and those technologies are now showing implications in more industries such as oil and gas, and blockchain in oil and gas, especially as it relates to automating contracts and optimizing some of the payment processes for B2B solutions, we think can have significant impact in the future of oil and gas space. And being kind of in this space in the past 2 or 3 years, we held many events in Houston, coming out to our partners' campus, and jointly select some startups that would come and pitch to the internal stakeholders and internal constituency in this oil and gas partners group. We invited Data Gumbo to one of the events that we held on Halliburton's campus, and quickly we realized by the feedback that was disseminated from the experts in that group, where we opened up to different stakeholders across different industries, we realized that there's an opportunity for the company to grow, and we're really bullish in making the first check. So we're really excited to have Data Gumbo as a part of our portfolio, and obviously, because our check size is pretty small, we go in early, so we're one of the first checks typically. But so that means that we take up a lot of risk. But so far, Data Gumbo has done a tremendous job, acquiring customers and growing their database in the oil and gas. And we're looking forward to supporting them across different regions that we have, and bringing them to the markets that they may not have access to, or they can have access in a much more cheaper and far more expedient for all parties involved through our global ecosystem.
Excellent. Well, let me switch gears a little bit for you here. So obviously you're looking at a lot of either pitch decks or listening to pitches from people. What advice would you have to a startup company that has potential of solving problems in oil and gas or even in the energy sector? One, to be able to stand out, or two, to be successful in getting funding?
Absolutely. Yeah. As you mentioned, we look at several thousand companies every year as an organization, and the more and more we kind of create some channels in the oil and gas space, we see the number of startups that are looking at that industry as a channel partner or a strategic partner to grow their business. Spending a lot of time with our oil and gas partners, what we see can be, and obviously we have our own, angel vetting mechanism where we kind of hash out the noise. We look at technologies that, have a clear value proposition, have a minimum viable product, an alpha or beta product, and a team. Hopefully they already raised their, seed round, a little bit of money, and hopefully a couple of pilot projects out with the oil and gas. Those are particularly of our interest, because we think if someone has been able to show their value to a couple of oil and gas companies, and at the time, for example, going back to the Data Gumbo question, at the time Data Gumbo was working closely with Diamond Offshore, and that visit for us to Diamond Offshore and getting feedback from them was extremely helpful for us to decide that Data Gumbo should join Plug and Play portfolio. But what we see is extremely helpful for the oil and gas sector and the technologies that really want to enter that space is to have that cross-sectional background and multidisciplinary experience, meaning that hopefully within their team they have someone that come from that industry, so they can talk oil and gas language. They can kind of move with the oil and gas space and kind of fit into the molds that the oil and gas has created for them. But obviously half of our job really is to be able to find applications from other industries and shepherd them to oil and gas, and that's kind of like where I spend, frankly speaking, half of my job. But I'd say in a general rule, obviously, if they get one or two pilots or proof of concepts going, whether it's paid or unpaid, I think that can help them find immediate hooking in the oil and gas space.
Excellent. So what's the best way for somebody to be able to get your attention then?
Yeah. Well, obviously, getting in touch with us is pretty simple. Um, my email, Wade at pmptc.com. We look at several companies every day, and our team is a big team that functionally centralized but distributed around the world. They can get in touch with us. We love to look at their inbound and see whether or not they fit into our ecosystem. We definitely encourage them to help define their value proposition in the oil and gas space. So we see a ton of technologies that have gotten clear traction in some of the other spaces in heavy industries, whether it's shipping, maritime, railroad, or other heavy industries that are now trying to get into the oil and gas space. My recommendation is to do your research prior to reaching out, and kind of curate your pitch deck and your kind of value proposition towards that sector, because that little bit of homework prior to your meeting and opportunity to sit in front of the oil and gas executives can exponentially increase your chances of working on a very meaningful way with those oil and gas parties.
So with your experience of obviously being out in Silicon Valley, being involved with startups on a daily basis, how would you rate the startup community of Houston, right? Because I'm actually based outside of the Austin area, and everybody knows, Austin's just another hot tech spot, right? But how would you rate Houston in what it's doing? Because I know there's a lot of guys in my industry right now who, their big complaint is that, if you're in Silicon Valley and you come up with an idea how to a better way for people to eat bananas, you get money just thrown at you. But if you're in oil and gas and you have an MVP product, you've got, $2 million in revenue and hundreds of clients, and you ask for, $10 in startup money, and nobody will pay attention to you just because you're in Houston or you're in oil and gas. What are your thoughts on the startup market, the startup game in Houston?
Absolutely. As I mentioned earlier, being in the oil and gas space, I've been going to Houston for the past couple of years, but we started getting really active since 2 or 3 months ago, considering Houston as our next kind of location where we want to build our model and kind of try to bridge Houston with our global resources. I think it's an up and coming ecosystem. We landscaped opportunities, and we realized that Houston has the potential to kind of give rise to new investable companies. Generally speaking, our intention is to be able to support the local ecosystem by creating an import-export opportunities for the companies from around the world to Houston, including Austin. Obviously, as you mentioned, Austin, from a technology standpoint and the ecosystem, it's a much more vibrant ecosystem. And one of our goals is to be able to kind of make Houston that innovation hub where the entrepreneurs can thrive, where the investors can come and find opportunities, and obviously layer in many different areas in which startups can go to market faster, build out their companies. So Houston, especially when you look at our kind of model where we try to create channels in the corporate world for the startups to validate their solutions, I think that can really have a major impact in helping the broader startup ecosystem. But our goal is to be able to make 5 to 10 investments each year in Houston. So this is the first year that we're kind of exploring the opportunities, and we're looking forward to meet with the startups in the region and kind of start getting the due diligence process rolling with our ventures team here.
Excellent. So let me throw one out there, and this is, from my personal interest, because I'm so in depth on the drilling side of the business. Have y'all seen anything in the drilling environment that is catching your eye, or you think is a worthwhile venture potentially? You don't have to mention any names, just because I know that there might be some proprietary nature to it. You don't give it away to your competition. Let them get the seed round or whatever.
Yeah. No, I think again, going back to kind of the major theme that we see across the oil and gas upstream business, applications of AI and machine learning. When you look at in the oil and gas space, obviously measurement wiring, MWD, and a few years back, we also looked into some hardware solutions, working and then focusing primarily on the drill bits, where we actually made a couple of investments back in the day. But from our kind of lens today, most of the things that we would be interested in looking at is how can we kind of optimize some of the supply chain challenges that we see in the drilling business. Reducing the downtime and making it more efficient for the operator as it relates to kind of ordering the new kind of shipment and taking the sand or water out in a more transparent, more safer, and much more cheaper way. We see those are the areas that we think startups can have an impact. But frankly speaking, with the core of the drilling space, we don't want to kind of put too much focus on. We know there are some companies out there, and obviously, if any of our corporate partners haven't seen those technologies, we'd be happy to catalyze some of those connections. That's what we do.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad you said measurement while drilling, because that's my background. That's where I cut my teeth at. So I know all the guys that are watching. Anybody that hears MWD, their ears are always going to perk up and be happy to hear something. So I'm going to send this out there. I'm going to ask a couple more questions. Now, guys, if you guys are watching, if you have any questions for Wade, you want to know anything, whether it's in the oil and gas space, Silicon Valley, investor startup, entrepreneurship, whatever it is, fire off some questions. Let's get something hammered out here for him. I don't think I've missed any. I think we've just had a lot of people saying, audio's on and it sounds good. So nothing wrong with that. I like knowing that the audio is working. LinkedIn beta has always been a tough challenge. So I'll say this. So this is the sector I'm in, to give myself a little bit of plug, because it is my show and it's brought to you by GibsonReports.com. If you guys don't know, we have Directional Drilling Market Share Report, and we're also going to be working on some new stuff here. So stay tuned to this next question. What about as far as helping out oil and gas companies with regulators, right? Is there any, is there some space in there? Because obviously there's a lot of essentially paper logistics that go on in that area. Is that something that you guys have got on your hit list at all?
Yeah, though that's a really good question. As a part of our due diligence process, we look at how the entrepreneurs are looking at the changes in frankly, in the energy space.
Wait, hold up, Wade. Hold up. Let's give it just a second to buffer there. Your internet was cutting out, and you were just answering the most important question of the day, because it was my question personally for me. So give me just a second. All right, go ahead and give it a shot again, because now we can hear you again.
Okay. Yeah. So hopefully you can hear me now.
Yeah.
So I was sharing a little bit about like how we go about, understanding the changes and how the paradigm of regulation can impact both the corporations and startups. So as a part of our due diligence process, when it comes to the decisioning of the startups, I would say we typically use the industry platform itself. How these entrepreneurs go about understanding the regulatory landscape as it relates to growing their business. So we build the foundation of the practice based on the needs of the private sector corporations, but we layer in many different areas for which the public sector, whether they're regulated policymakers, legislators, to come in and share some of the obstacles that the startups may face. But really, we ask the entrepreneurs, how do they build their business model around the changes in the possible changes in the regulatory landscape and see in which sector they get more traction. And based on that and collecting expert feedback, we kind of make our own investment decisions. But in our opinion, for the industry to kind of push the envelope, we certainly need all the components of the ecosystem to mobilize, and regulators, in our opinion, play a significant role. So we do see the value of engaging them in our kind of practice. However, we also think that the entrepreneurs themselves are the ones that really have hashed out the noise and have come to the bottom of what it really takes to work with the regulators and other government bodies and agencies that they need to work with. So there's not much that we do with the corporate as it relates to corporate relationships and regulators. Where we want to position ourselves and strengthen that position is at intersection of technology and business.
Excellent. Well, I know that we got a couple of guys in here. I know both of these guys. And one of them says, I will be reaching out to him for sure. That was Dallas Scott with GS Logs. So be on the lookout for that email.
Look forward to it.
George Danforth says, any appetite for remote operations technology? So obviously that has a lot of far-reaching implications, but one of the things that we've seen in oil and gas is that we are starting to get less people at the work sites and more people in the office as internet connectivity, remote control applications are working. What have you guys seen on that front?
Absolutely. No, I think that's a really good question. One of the newest partners that we brought on board is Maersk Drilling, and as you can imagine, a lot of the operations that they have offshore, it really requires high computational capabilities for them to be able to kind of keep up with the pace of innovation that's happening across their value chain, and remote harsh condition monitoring of the assets, especially in the oil and gas space in some areas where there's high pressure and temperature. We see the kind of workforce paradigm is shifting very rapidly. One of the concerns that all the oil and gas partners have across the board is how can they kind of keep up with the changing expectations of their own internal workers, and how can they shift their the culture of their kind of employees, and we see a lot of technologies and remote operations is certainly an area that we have a line of sight for, and that's not only in the oil and gas space. As you can imagine, we work with some of the largest automakers, with some of the railroads and maritime. They all have needs and interest in the remote operations area. So another one of the interesting companies that, for example, we have is a company called Uber Cloud that really brings a lot of the computational capabilities that the on-site operators will require to be able to quickly make a decision on shutting off or on a valve, or calling out for a crew to come in and put out a fire, or anything as it relates to safety and the health of the workforce in harsh conditions. I think those areas. In fact, we have a joint venture with Lloyd's Register that is primarily focused on the safety of workforce in the oil and gas space.
Interesting.
So
that's good to hear.
Yeah, so we're pretty active in that space, and we do look forward to getting more and more startups that want to kind of bring their technologies, whether it's computer vision or natural language processing, or the new emerging technologies that can really have an impact in creating safety, transparency, reliability, resiliency in the workforce.
Excellent. All right, well, we haven't gotten any more questions, so I'm going to fire off the last one to you. being a new entrepreneur myself, I know I've got a handful of other guys that are watching that are entrepreneurs, and there's probably somebody out there that's watching that's wanting to be one. Having dealt with a lot of investment, dealing with a lot of this stuff, what would be your one piece of advice to entrepreneurs? And then what would be your one point of advice on whether to take funding or not to take funding? Because I know that a lot of people are like, I'm going to be an entrepreneur and I'm going to just take funding. I know that that's not always the right route. So what would you say there? What's your one piece of advice just for in general to an entrepreneur? And then what would you say about whether somebody should take funding or not?
Yeah, great questions. I really appreciate you asking. I think there's so many areas I'd love to be able to cover, but if I were to hone it down to maybe one or two pieces of advice, number one is to have integrity in creating your pitch deck. One of the key components of building a strong relationship, being a successful business with your investors or prospective clients is that having a really good relationship that's primarily founded on an integrity. So make sure that if you share anything as it relates to your customer acquisition or fundraise or the investments that you have received, make sure it's consistent across the board, whether it's in early stage or later stage. To your question regarding funding, I would say when you talk with a risk averse oil and gas stakeholder, one of the most common challenges that we see in the oil and gas space is that the cultural change and how risk adverse they are. So for an oil and gas company to see that you have done a project with their peer or their supplier or their OEM in this space is extremely valuable. So in early days of your business, obviously investing some of your time and capital to do some projects, whether it's an unpaid pilot projects that can kind of show the fidelity of your insights and the validation of your solutions, can be extremely valuable. Once you get the first and second logo on your website, that's when you start receiving an inbound from investors and the other corporations in that sector. So I wouldn't really focus on obviously depending on what's your burn rate and how many people you brought on board prior to your seed round. But I'd say in early days, try to focus as much as you can on getting a couple of pilot projects rolling, and hopefully once you prove that your technology has a viable solution, then you'll see the magic happen afterwards.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, man. I do appreciate it. We didn't get any more questions. I'm going to have to start doing something to, tell all 37 people out there that are watching to really get engaged, because not every day you get to have a conversation with the guy from Plug and Play. I mean, come on now, guys. This is your chance to be able to get your questions answered. So, Wade, thank you so much for coming on. I really do appreciate it. Guys, remember, Wade is on here helping, and myself helping to be able to promote the SPE Energy Dot event that will be taking place August 15th in Houston, Texas. I believe it's at the Match facility, something. It's called Match something, but it's not like Match.com. It's not a dating website or anything like that. More or less getting sorry, laughing at her in the background. We're trying to get Silicon Valley, oil and gas, and high tech all kind of meshed into one place. So Wade, thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate you taking the time. I appreciate everybody over there at Plug and Play. If you guys have any questions or anything, I've tagged him in the post, also tagged him in the prior post as well. Go get in touch with him. Go ahead and give him a shout out about your product. Have that integrity. And Wade, thanks so much for joining the show. And for everybody watching, as always, know your industry.